Welcome to Silverstone. This is Yamaha's R1, which arguably has the most advanced rider aids of any 1000cc road bike currently available at the moment. Now 10 to 15 years ago, when rider aids started coming out, like ABS and traction control, you come to a racetrack like this and you'd switch them off. That's essentially because the rider aids back then were like an old Nokia phone. But now they're like a new iPhone. They're so advanced, even a very good rider will still use the standard rider aids. So firstly, what are the rider aids and how do they work? Well, the Yamaha is very unique because they use their own system. Most other manufacturers use a Bosch system that they buy off the shelf, they fit to the bike, and then they fit it around the parameters and the horsepower of that motorcycle. The Yamaha uses a system that is very similar to the one that Valentino was using in MotoGP in 2012. Essentially, in a very, very basic scenario, this bike has an IMU, which measures the lean, the pitch, the yaw, the gravity, and that is communicating to the brain of the motorcycle that is also taking data from wheel speed, brake lever, throttle position, gear, RPM, crank speed, etc. When it detects that something's about to go wrong or is going wrong, it then intervenes, and when you're back in line, it reintroduces the power. Now that's a very basic, simple way of doing it. Now we come to a lot of track days and we see a lot of riders turn up and the first thing they do is they switch everything off, because they think that they can beat the system. But what we're going to try and do today is show you how to trim your rider aids to fit the way you ride, the tyres you're on, and your physicality and how tired you are, and the conditions. So the first thing we're going to do is try it with the most restricted rider mode. So we're going to turn up the slide control, we're going to turn up the traction, we're going to soften the power, we're going to keep the quick shifter on, and we are going to give it as much engine brake assist as possible. We're going to see how that feels. Then we're going to do the exact opposite. Switch off the slide control, give it really sharp throttle response, turn off the engine brake assist, and see how that rides. And then hopefully we'll find a scenario somewhere in the middle that suits the way I ride, this motorcycle, these track conditions, and these tyres. And hopefully, by the end of the day, we'll have fit a bike that fits the way I ride and my style, and we can show you that if you're in a slow group or the medium group, or you're feeling tired, how to trim and change your riding positions and your rider modes. So we've just done the first session. We've opted for power mode 3, because if we go for power mode 4, that's more like a rain mode, and at Silverstone here, we're at the international circuit. I don't really want to be going down the back straight at 70 miles an hour in the fast group. So we've gone for power mode 3, traction is on 9, slide control is 3, and the engine brake management is 3. So that's kind of everything maxed out with the softest power mode. Now it's not unrideable, it's not slow, it's still full power. So it's still a fast R1, but the throttle is really, really soft, really, really user-friendly, which means you can get on the power really early, because as you accelerate, it then calculates how much power it's going to give you. And again, you've got the traction on 9 and the slide control on 3, which is its maximum settings. It's not cutting in, it's not it's not misfiring like you would have on a system 10 years ago. It's really smooth. In fact, it's hard to tell if the system's on or not. The other difference is we've got some engine helping here. So the RPM increases slightly, so you roll into the corner like a two-stroke. So rather than the back end skittering and scratching, because you've got lots of engine braking, it raises the RPM and lets you roll into the corner. So now we've done the safe and steady one, let's go to the other extreme. Let's put the power on the most responsive, reduce the rider aids, and switch a few off. That was good fun. We got the power on 1, so that's full power and really responsive on the throttle. We've got the traction on 1 out of 9. We've turned off the slide control and we've turned down the engine brake management. So essentially the butterflies don't open when I go into the corner, so I've got lots of engine braking. You instantly feel the difference because we've gone from one extreme to the other. The pickup is quite sharp. It's not so noticeable higher up in the RPM, but when you first quarter turn of the throttle, as you put the load onto the tyre, it's quite sharp, and sometimes that can just get the tyre to move a little bit, especially towards the end of the session when the tyre's getting hot, because we're on road tyres. And I haven't got any slide control, so it will slide a little bit when I initially tap the throttle. Just doesn't give you the confidence, because as you turn the throttle, you've got that little slide as it loads, and then you haven't got any slide control either. On the brakes, the braking is the same, but the difference is now I can hear the rear chirping as I'm going into corners because the rear's starting to lock up because I've got a lot of engine braking. What I need to do is change that so I've got a little bit more engine brake assist. So now let's go for another session. I think we're going to put the slide control back on because we're on road tyres, we're not on slicks. Traction I think is about thereabouts. Wheelie control, don't really need because we're at Silverstone, it's quite flat. And I think the power I might go for 2 out of 3. Just soften it a little so it's just not as sharp. Let's see how that goes. So that's another session done, and what I'm trying to do now is tailor the rider aids to how I ride. So I've gone for power 2 out of 3, so I'm kind of midway. So it's not as sharp, it's nice and progressive and linear, but it's not really quick and responsive. I've turned the traction up to 2 out of 9, it was on 1. Slide control I left on 1, and the engine brake management I've put on 2. So the butterflies will open and increase the RPM as I go into the corner, which just means I've got less engine braking. So it's a bit more like 2-stroke, and you can roll it into the corner. We're about there near enough, but it's getting a bit later on in the afternoon now. I've done a couple of sessions, and the rear tyre's getting a bit worn. We're just on road treads. So I'm just going to increase the traction a little and the slide a little, just to give me that peace of mind when I'm out on track, and we'll continue playing. And this is the whole experiment and the whole idea of rider aids. If you've got the capabilities of trimming your bike, like you do have with the R1, it's well worth doing. So many times I see people getting tired and putting the bikes in the van at 3, 4 o'clock, but just soften the power, turn up the traction, make sure you've got your corner and ABS on, just keep riding. We're here with Jeff, Market Manager, Yamaha UK. Jeff, can you explain to us how the rider aids on the R1 differs from every other manufacturer?
Sure, so this is the 2020 R1, so this is now the 3rd generation of our IMU rider aids package that comes with the bike. A couple of new features this year, but essentially the system is based on the exact system that Rossi used at MotoGP in 2012. The big difference between his system and our system on a standard road bike is that Rossi could program the system for each corner, whereas for the road bike you just have one program, lots of options and 4 modes. But Rossi could actually have an individual map for each corner.
Just tracking around the whole track and it changed per corner?
Yeah, so it knew what the grip was at each corner and what the optimum settings were for Rossi for that day.
So let's look at the dash and let's see how we actually change the modes.
Okay, so we'll just turn it on. There's a nice welcome screen that you get. And then essentially to access the main modes, there's a little pinwheel here on this side, which you scroll. If you press it in and hold it for about 10 seconds, you get to the mode screen. So this is now one level into the menu. You scroll it, select the menu you want, which in this case is the settings. Press again quickly, and that's then a select. So the press and hold changes the menu, press once to select. And then you can simply scroll across the different functions and build up a program, a map that suits you for each of the configurations that you want.
Okay, so for example, I can have one mode with everything off, one mode with everything on, and then just have a road mode and a wet mode. And
the best way I could advise people doing it is actually keep a note of things. If you come to a track day, for example, you might want a mode for when the temperature is cold in the morning. with a little bit more traction control, a bit more slide control. Then as the temperature comes up, you might want less intervention by the system, but then later on your tyre might wear. So it's so quick and easy to change the program. If you were using it on the road, you would just put in another settings for the road that would suit you. And there's always a default rain setting in there just in case.
All right, a default mode. Okay, perfect. All right, let's give it another session then.
Have fun.
So we're just finishing here at Silverstone with Yamaha. What an awesome day. It's been hugely interesting because we've played around with the traction control, the slide control and other rider aids, but we've also had really inclement weather. So we've had a little bit of rain, and as you can probably see, the rear tyre is about done. So we started with all the rider aids active. It was really interesting. The bike is still rideable, it's not juddering, it's not spluttering, it's not like the old rider systems of old. Then we went the extreme end, switched everything off, went down to minimum. It was a little bit sharp on the throttle, the back end came round a little on the brakes, because that's a race setting for slicks. So I was honest with myself, wanted the fueling to be a little bit softer, wanted a bit more slide control, a bit more traction, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I seemed to be like towards a kind of middle ground there. Then when we had a rain shower, we upped the traction control, upped the slide control, left the fueling as it was. And on the last session then, to be honest, I was tired, the back tyre was about done, and I just enjoyed it. And so many times I've seen on a track day, everybody packs away early because they're exhausted. But if you're exhausted, just cater the rider aids to fit the way you ride, like we've said previously. Thoroughly enjoyable day. Please, if you've got a bike like Yamaha's R1, tinker with the rider aids. Thoroughly enjoyable time. And if you haven't got an R1, try the Yamaha experience. Totally awesome day at Silverstone.